At 15, the rain felt like needles against my skin as the front door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing louder than the thunder rolling above our house. And in that exact moment, I understood something terrifying and permanent. I was no longer welcome in the place I had called home my entire life. My backpack was half zipped. My phone battery was at 9%. And my hands were shaking so badly I could barely pull my hoodie tighter around myself. My father stood on the porch for just a second after throwing me out, his face twisted with anger and certainty. The kind that comes when someone believes they are absolutely right. "Don't come back until you learn to tell the truth," he shouted over the storm, and then he turned away, already convinced the story he had chosen to believe was the only one that mattered. The lie started earlier that evening, quietly and stupidly, the way most life-destroying moments do. A missing envelope, some cash meant for utility bills, and a neighbor who had seen me walk home around the same time it disappeared. I didn't even understand what was happening at first. My mother's voice was sharp and tight. My younger brother was crying in his room, and my father kept asking the same question over and over, like repetition would magically change reality. "Where did you put it?" I said I didn't know. That was the truth. But the truth didn't fit the version of events they had already decided on. They had a narrative. Stressed household, missing money, teenage son with nowhere else to point the blame. Once that narrative settled in, nothing I said could touch it. I remember standing in the living room while my father paced, every step heavy with judgment, listing all the times I'd been late, all the times I'd talked back, all the times I'd asked for things we couldn't afford. In his mind, those moments stacked neatly into proof. My mother didn't look at me once. She stood by the kitchen counter, gripping a dish towel like it was the only thing keeping her upright. When I said, "I didn't take it," my father laughed. A short, bitter sound that felt worse than shouting. "You think I was born yesterday?" he said. And that was when I realized I wasn't being questioned anymore. I was being sentenced. He didn't hit me. He didn't curse. He just walked to my room, grabbed the backpack I used for school, shoved some clothes inside without folding them, and placed it at my feet. The finality of that action was more brutal than any scream could have been. "You're not staying here tonight," he said. "Maybe sleeping outside will teach you something." The storm had already started by the time he opened the door. Rain slamming sideways, wind bending the trees, the sky flashing white with lightning. For a brief second I thought he was bluffing. Parents threaten things all the time. But then he pushed the door closed behind me. I stood on the porch for a few seconds, stunned, expecting it to reopen. It didn't. I knocked once, then again harder, then stopped when I heard his footsteps moving away. The realization settled slowly and painfully. I was alone. I stepped off the porch and onto the soaked driveway, my sneakers filling with water instantly. The streetlights blurred through the rain as I walked with no destination. Just the instinct to keep moving because standing still felt like giving up. I didn't go to any friend's house. Pride, fear, and embarrassment formed a wall I couldn't climb. Instead, I ducked under the overhang of a closed hardware store 3 blocks away and sat on the cold concrete hugging my knees, watching water run down the curb like the world was being washed clean without me. I checked my phone. No messages. No missed calls. I texted my mother once, just 3 words. "Please let me explain." The message delivered. There was no reply. Time passed strangely that night. Minutes felt like hours, hours like nothing at all. I replayed the argument over and over in my head, searching for the moment I could have said something differently, something that would have made them pause. But the truth was brutal and simple. They had already decided who I was in that story, and it wasn't the son they trusted. It was the problem they needed to remove. Around midnight, The rain softened into a steady drizzle and exhaustion settled into my bones. I leaned my head against the brick wall, fighting sleep because sleeping felt dangerous. Every sound made me flinch. I was 15 years old, soaked, shaking, and officially homeless because of a lie I didn't even understand yet. And while I sat there trying to survive the night, something was happening inside that house I'd been thrown out of. Something no one had anticipated. Something that would unravel everything my father thought he knew. 3 hours after he shut the door in my face, while I was still sitting under that overhang counting my breaths to stay calm, my father's phone rang. 3 hours after my father slammed the door and convinced himself he had done the right thing. His phone rang in the quiet living room. The house had finally settled into an uneasy silence. My mother sat at the kitchen table staring at the same spot on the wood grain, replaying the argument in her head, telling herself that this was discipline, that this was necessary. My younger brother had cried himself to sleep. My father was in his chair, arms crossed, watching muted television with the volume low, still riding the strange sense of moral certainty that comes from believing you've punished the right person. When the phone vibrated against the table, he almost ignored it. It was late, stormy. No one called at that hour unless something was wrong. He answered anyway. The voice on the other end didn't raise itself. It didn't accuse. It didn't sound angry. It sounded calm, professional, and unmistakably serious. "Sir, this is Officer Daniels with the local police department. I need to ask you a few questions regarding an incident reported earlier tonight." My father straightened in his chair. My mother looked up immediately, her stomach tightening before she even understood why. The word, police, has a way of cutting through certainty like a blade. Officer Daniels continued, explaining that a report had been filed regarding missing cash, potential theft, and suspicious activity connected not to a 15-year-old boy, but to an adult. Specifically, an adult neighbor who had been seen entering our home earlier that day while no one was present. A neighbor who had a documented history of similar incidents in the area. A neighbor whose car had been caught on a nearby traffic camera, leaving our street shortly after the envelope went missing. My father didn't speak. He couldn't. His mouth opened, then closed again. My mother slowly stood up, one hand gripping the back of a chair, the color draining from her face, as every moment of the evening replayed itself with horrifying clarity. The accusation, the shouting, the backpack, the door slamming shut, the storm. Officer Daniels asked another question, then another, each one tightening the knot in my father's chest. By the time the call ended, the truth was no longer abstract. It was undeniable. They had been wrong. Completely, catastrophically wrong. My father stood so fast his chair tipped backward onto the floor. He didn't even notice. He grabbed his keys with shaking hands. His earlier anger replaced by something far worse, panic. "Where is he?" My mother whispered, her voice breaking in a way it hadn't during the argument. "Where did we send him?" Neither of them had an answer. They hadn't asked. They hadn't cared. They had assumed I would figure it out, that the night would teach me something. What it had taught me instead was how quickly trust could vanish. They drove through the storm, calling my name out of the car window, like sound could undo what had already happened. They checked friends' houses, the school field, the park, anywhere they thought a scared kid might hide. When they finally spotted me under the hardware store overhang, soaked to the skin, knees pulled to my chest, my mother let out a sound that wasn't a word at all. It was pure regret. My father didn't speak. He couldn't. He just stood there staring at me like he was seeing a stranger. Or worse, like he was finally seeing his son clearly for the first time. I didn't jump up. I didn't run into their arms. I stood slowly, every movement stiff, every emotion locked behind. Something hard and protective that hadn't existed before that night. My father reached out, then stopped, his hand hovering uselessly in the air. "I was wrong," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "I was wrong, and He couldn't finish the sentence. Apologies don't come easily to people who build their authority on certainty. We went home, but nothing felt the same. The house smelled the same, looked the same, but it wasn't the place I had left earlier that night. Something invisible had cracked. The next day the police confirmed everything. The neighbor confessed. The money was recovered. The truth was official, documented, undeniable. People apologized. My father apologized again, this time with tears in his eyes. My mother cried in the kitchen while making breakfast like she could cook normalcy back into existence. But something had already changed inside me. At 15, I learned that being innocent doesn't protect you. That being family doesn't guarantee belief. That authority often chooses the easiest story over the true one. My father never threw me out again. He never raised his voice at me the same way. But the trust I'd had that blind, unshakable trust never fully came back. I became quieter, more careful, more self-reliant. I stopped assuming safety was permanent. Years later, my father would tell people that night was the worst mistake of his life. He would say it taught him humility, patience, the danger of acting before knowing the truth. And maybe it did. But it also taught me something just as permanent. When the world turns against you, sometimes the only thing that saves you is endurance. And the truth arriving, whether people are ready for it or not. I was 15 when I was thrown out in a storm over a lie. 3 hours later, the police called my father. But the real consequences of that night lasted far longer than the rain